It's lesson 5, part 2, and we're going to do a little bit of work, not a ton, a little bit work formatting our PHP gaming site. So I'm going to, first of all, connect to OpenVPN. I'm going to start up my XAMPP server. And I'm going to open the PHP gaming project in PHP Storm. So I'll open up the project. So we built these files last week. We built the publisher files together. You guys kind of worked on them in your breakout groups. So let's have a look. If I load my games page, so we have our games loading. And then on our game details. So we're going to do a couple of things here. One with PHP and a couple things with Bootstrap. Okay, we've already used Bootstrap here on our games page. We've included it. So let's open that up. So we downloaded the Bootstrap CSS file. We included it in our header. We did this a couple weeks ago. And then we added some class definitions to our table tag. And the table class makes it 100% width. Our table striped gives us alternating background colors. And table hover gives us this little rollover effect. So we've added some formatting here. But our game details form, it's got no CSS. So let's format this with a bit of CSS, first of all. So we'll open up our game details file. And in the header, I want to add the Bootstrap style sheet that we're using on the games.php. So I can just copy that, or I could just add the link. It's not very difficult. So I'll add rel equals style sheet. Our type is, of course, going to be text/CSS. And our href will be our same CSS. If you want to just copy that from the other file, that's fine. So as soon as I add the style sheet, we should notice a few changes. So if I reload the page, you can see the difference. Our field set borders are gone. Our margin and padding is sort of gone. And we can see that the font changes as well. So go ahead and add your CSS link. What things should we do to kind of clean up the user interface here? How would you improve the look of this page? I could see at least 2, maybe 3 things we could do that we could use Bootstrap for. Okay, yep. Colton, can you be a little more? Yeah, be a little more specific. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, just with how it looks. How would you improve it? Okay, so we could look at adding some padding. Yep. It's a good idea. Anything else? Maybe some margins. Okay, yep. Yeah, we probably want to align the inputs. Right now, the inputs just appear immediately to the right of our labels. So we probably want some alignment. Thinking we could also add some styling on the button. Yeah, we could center them as well. Yeah, we could add borders, colors. Okay, so we can use some of the classes available in the Bootstrap style sheet to do some of these things. So to add at least some padding around the whole thing, I'm going to put a main tag right inside the body, and I'm going to give it a class. So this is a Bootstrap class. I'm going to give it a container class. And I'm going to move my entire form inside of main. Okay, so I've added this main tag right inside the body. And then I've closed it. And PHP Storm is great because it lets us expand or contract HTML nodes to make our code a little easier to see. So I want to make sure my entire form, from the opening to the closing, that it's inside of the main tag. So at least I get some padding on the left with that container. Okay, so we added main class equals container. We probably also want maybe a heading on here. Let's add an H1 at the top of our form, above our form, that says game details. And maybe I'll even think about spelling it right. So we'll add an H1. So we've moved it over a bit. We've got a heading. Now let's look at maybe aligning our input. So all of our labels are the same width. So inside our form, I'm going to add classes to all the labels. So Bootstrap uses a 12-column system. So if I set the class to call 12, the label would span the full width of the page. So I'm going to use maybe call 2. I'll try that. I'm going to add this class equals call dash 2 on all 3 of the labels. And it doesn't have to be call 2, and you don't have to follow the classes that I use. You're free to experiment however you want. I would encourage you to experiment. But I'm just going to add a class of call2 to all of my labels and see if that aligns our 3 text boxes. So save that change. You know what? Maybe I want them a little wider. Because when I shrink this down, at full scale, it's okay. But I'll maybe make it, maybe I'll do call 3, a little bit wider. But by using the same class, it applies a width based on my device scale. Maybe at full scale that's too far apart. Sorry, I'm going to undo it. I like 2 better. Okay, so now we've got them left aligned. Where should the save button go? I don't think it looks very good there. We have a few other options of where we might want the save button to go. Personally, I don't like it under here. Where might the save button look better? Okay, so yeah, we could center it. That's an option. We could put it over on the right. I could also align it to the left, align the left edge of the button with the left edge of our 3 inputs. So I'll add a class to the button. And if I want to offset it by 2 columns, in other words, add 2 columns worth of left padding, if I pick offset 2, that should align the left edge of the button to the left edge of all 3 inputs. So I'm going to add a class of offset 2 columns. So now it jumps the button. Oh, interesting. Almost jumps it all the way over. Now I also want to add some color to my button. So if I look at the Bootstrap documentation here at getbootstrap.com/docs, it has these different button classes. So we can pick any one of these. So primary is going to be blue. We can also override these styles in our own style sheet, but for now, I'll just work with one of these. So maybe I'm going to use this BTN and BTN primary to get a blue button with white text. So on my button, I'm going to use that as well, BTN and BTN primary. So this should make my gray button with black text should become a blue button with white text. It's also going to round the edges. So get rounded corners. So this is what we had with no CSS. This is what we have now. I think we should also add a little padding to our field sets. I'm not sure exactly which class to use, but we'll okay, there is no padding. Let's see. We'll go back to the documentation and find a class. Let's search for padding. Okay, so they've got padding from 0 to 5. So we can just use like P-2. I'm going to try that on the field sets. We'll see how it looks. I'll add it to my first field set and we can see if we like it. Yeah, I think that's a little better. So I'm going to add my P-2. I'll add it to my button and the 3 field sets. So I'm not defining any styles of my own. I'm just kind of leveraging, using what Bootstrap offers. Not sure why. I want to push this over a little more. Maybe if I make my button, let's see. Maybe that'll move it to the right a little bit. No, okay, don't worry about that. Probably good enough for now. I'll figure out what else we need to do to align it perfectly to the left here. Offset 3. Okay. Thanks, David. Good suggestion. Yeah, I agree. That does look better. Then it's in the middle of this column. Good suggestion. Or MT3. Okay. Thanks, Felix. Yep. So again, play around. You can experiment. You don't have to use the same classes I'm using. Yep. That's right, Colton. All the classes are here. So in the documentation link that I gave you, that's for the buttons. But in the Bootstrap docs, it tells you everything. So how to do layout, colors. You can use Sass if you want. So everything is here. Right, so here they've used form controls. So yeah, we're not defining any CSS of our own. This is the developer who is not a designer, aka me. This is their easy way, quick and easy way of getting some basic CSS running without having to create our own. And we can customize it. So let's say, for example, we want to use this BTN primary, but let's say you don't like this blue color, right? You want a different color as the primary. Maybe you want blue, but you want something here. We can create our own style sheet. We can override the BTN primary class with our own color. And in many cases, that's what sites do. They use Bootstrap, and then they have their own custom styles to override certain elements of Bootstrap. Otherwise, every site that uses Bootstrap will look exactly the same. So we'll maybe do more of that later. We'll customize some of the colors, maybe add a custom font. So we're going to use Bootstrap for most of the CSS, but we can add some of our own on top to make the site personal and brand it for our existing client and project. It's typically what we do. Okay, so there's our basic Bootstrap form. We will eventually also work to add a navigation bar. And again, we can just copy the component. So Bootstrap has a bunch of nav bars here. It shows us samples. So this one's got a drop down and a search button. And it actually gives us all the HTML. So if we want to do something like, actually, I guess we can put it right on this one page just for now. Let's see, where are they? I think they've got a color one. So let's say we want this bright blue nav bar. We can put it in, maybe we'll just put it in our game details. So I'm going to grab this nav tag. I'll put it in the chat. So we have a nav class equals nav bar dark, BG primary. So again, it uses that blue color. So above our main tag, we'll put in a nav bar, and we'll put in a couple of links in the nav bar. I'm just going to grab this. I'll put it in the chat. Well, actually, I'll clean it up first. Let's just see how this looks. I'm going to remove some of the stuff here. So now it gives us our little navigation bar. Yep, that's great if you did that, David. That's what we're going to do in our PHP gaming site. So maybe what I'll do here is I'll just change this first link so that it says PHP gaming. So here's our full nav bar. I'll put it in the chat. So we've got a link that we can update later. We've got our little mobile. So we'll do more with that in a few weeks. We'll do more with it after reading week. But you can see how we can easily use Bootstrap, and this is starting to look like an actual web application. You know, it's not fancy, but you can see progress, right? If this is where we were, this is an improvement. Yeah, right. Why reinvent the wheel? And as I said, we'll do some customization with it later, but Bootstrap is open source, so we're free to just go and use this code. We're free to use the style sheet and any of the classes, and they're all documented on the Bootstrap site. So it's a huge time saver for us that it has all these pre-built components we can use, and then we'll customize. So we'll do more with this after reading week and building we can build one navigation bar and we can share it among all the different pages of the site. So just like with your CSS, if we want to make an update, we're only updating one file. And that file will just be linked into all the other files. Same way a style sheet or a JavaScript file will be. So we get that shared header at the top, maybe a shared footer, and our styles that will cascade through our site that we can then customize. So we'll add a custom font. We'll maybe override some of the color schemes and add links in our nav bar. We'll do all of that. So we've got one more change I want to make to this page as well as to this page. So I'll leave the nav bar off of here for now because we'll be adding it as a shared nav bar later on. So last week we added pages to create publishers, but I want to add those publishers in here. So when we're adding a game, we can now choose a publisher and save it. And then on our games page, we also want to show the publisher. And this will be similar to what you're doing in your assignment. So in game details, we want to add a new label and a drop-down list here. And then our save page, we also want to save that value to the database, and then we want to show it here. So we already have our game details page open. So above our button, I'm going to create one more field set with a class P2 for padding. So we're going to create a label that says publisher, but it's going to be for an input called publisher ID. And then just like in your assignment, we need to select a drop-down list. So we're going to call this publisher ID. And inside of here, how can we get the name? How can we get all the publishers? So if I save this right now, we're going to have an empty drop-down list on the page. So last week we created publishers in our database. Right, we need to grab them from the table that we made last week. So if I look in my database, so last week we entered all these publishers in the database. So I want this list to populate into our form. So when we're adding a game, we can pick one of the publishers. And this is similar to what I'm asking you to do in your assignment, right? You have two tables in the assignment. One that saves data from the form, and a second table that is used to populate a drop-down list inside of your form. So we need to use PHP inside our select box to go and fetch that list and populate it. So I'm going to put on a set of PHP tags here. So we're going to connect, set up, and run query to get all publishers. Add each publisher to the list. So we've already done this. We did this in class 2 weeks ago. We filled the drop-down list, but in that case, we did it on a separate page. Here, I'm going to integrate the drop-down list right into our form. So our connection is the same as always. So we're going to connect to our usual host with our standard credential. If you want to copy your connection from one of the other pages, you can, or you can hand code it. Our query is going to be pretty simple. Select star, select all the columns in the publishers table. We've only got 2 columns, right? Publisher ID and name. I'll create my command variable by calling prepare on the database. So we've done this line of code on every page we've written that has used the database. Never really changes. Then we call execute. And then we're going to call fetch all to populate our publishers variable. So there's absolutely nothing new here. You guys did it in lab 1. We did it in class 2 weeks ago when we worked on reading data. Connect to the database, set up an SQL select statement, pull some data out of our MySQL database, prepare and execute the command, and call fetch all. So absolutely nothing new. This is an exact repeat of stuff we've already done, both together and that you did on your own in lab 1. My last line to disconnect, same as always, db equals null. And here we're going to repeat some of what we did 2 weeks ago. So we built this file, we built a game dropdown. So in this file, we were selecting the games and sorting them alphabetically by the title. You'll notice all this code is identical: prepare, execute, fetch, all. And then we used a loop to create HTML option tags inside our select. So we're basically just going to repeat this. So for each one of the publishers, I'll maybe just put it in as P to be simple. We're going to echo out an option value. So for the value, we want to use the publisher ID. And for the text, we want it to be the name. Whoops, I missed a P. So here's our loop. Like I said, query should be totally familiar by now, or more familiar, maybe not totally familiar, more familiar. Run a query, prepare, execute, and fetch. And then in a loop, we want to add every publisher to our dropdown with a new option tag. So I'm going to go back to my browser in a minute. I want to refresh the page and see if the list of publishers shows up in my drop-down list that right now is empty. Right, we get this. When I refresh it, it now brings up my list. I might also want to sort my list alphabetically. So which line could we change so that the list shows up from in alphabetical order? It doesn't have to be in alphabetical order, but it's going to be easier for people to use this page if the list is in alphabetical order. Which line number would we modify for that? Yep, Colton, we want the name. So which line number? You can see my line numbers here. Which line do we want to change to tell it to sort by name? You're right that we want to sort by name. You got it. So we can just add an order by name. So our query is going to get all columns, but we're going to sort alphabetically A to Z. So I'm going to add this into the query. I'll go back and refresh and try it out. So now my list is sorted, and yeah, I have some duplicates. I'll deal with those later. So now we filled our list from our second table, and this is part of what I'm asking you to do in your assignment, is that your form should include a list that's filled from another table. Now I can go ahead and add a new game right now. Let's see what's here. Right, I've got a bunch of games, but notice the publisher ID is null for all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and try and add a new game. I'll just pick Activision as the publisher. And when I hit save, if I go to the database and run my query, it's added my new game, but notice my publisher ID is blank. That's kind of odd. How come? I picked Activision as the publisher, but why this kind of somehow didn't save? The rest of the information saved. The title, the year, and the rating. I have all of those. Why don't I have a close, Tanya? Well, there is a connection because it does save, but why doesn't it save the publisher ID? You're on the right track. So it added my game, but didn't add the publisher. Right. So on our save game page, here's our SQL. Insert into the title, the release year, and the rating. We haven't added the publisher ID to our code when we're saving. So right now, it's only inserting title, release year, and rating. So we need to modify the save page so that the publisher is also included when we save a game. We've added it to the form, but it also now needs to be included in our code when we're inserting. So this should be fairly simple. We're going to need one more variable. And don't worry if you're a little behind. I'm going to push all this code up to GitHub shortly. So I'm going to add a publisher ID. So just like the other fields, it's going to come from the publisher ID field. That's our dropdown on our form. So our select box has a name of publisher ID, and it's written this way in camel case with a capital I. Here's my select, name equals publisher ID. So that's included in our post array. We want to fill a variable, also called publisher ID, and we want to validate it. We don't want to save any more games without a publisher. So I'm basically going to do the same check we did for release year. We want to make sure that publisher ID, so I'll just copy that section, and I'm going to update it. So if publisher ID is empty, we're going to give the user an error message. This is publisher is required. And if we have a value, but it's not a number, we'll say publisher ID must be numeric. So again, I've just copied the release year validation, this little if-else script, and we're going to paste it, and we're going to make the same change. Same checks for publisher ID, that it's not empty, and if it isn't empty, we want to ensure we get a number. Because our database can't store publisher ABC. It wants an ID. So our next step is going to be to modify our insert and add one more parameter. So instead of adding 3 parameters, we're going to add 4. So in our insert, I'm now going to add publisher ID. It gets added here. Oh, Ariel, right below. So here I copied this section starting up for me on line 23 where we're checking the release year. I just copied it straight below that if else. Okay, so before the if okay equals true. I pasted it and then I changed release year to publisher ID. I'll leave this up for a minute. Does that help? No problem. So we're adding one more validation check before we check our OK variable. So our insert statement, we want to add publisher ID here. And I'll just wrap this to another line. And I'm going to add with a colon a new parameter called publisher ID. So before we were inserting into title, release year, and rating, 3 parameters, title, release year, rating. We're adding a 4th column and 4th parameter. Like I said, don't worry if you get stuck or a little behind. I will push this up to GitHub shortly. So if I run the code this way, if I run it this way, I'm actually going to get an error. I'll go back and try again. New game 2. Why will it give me an error if I try to save my game now? Code we've written isn't wrong, it's just not complete. What are we missing? Why do you think this might crash? Right, David. We need another bind param because our SQL now has 4 parameters, 1, 2, 3, and 4, but we're only filling the first 3. So if I save right now, it's going to give us generate an error saying the number of parameters don't match. Right? Invalid parameter number. Number of bound variables doesn't match number of tokens. So some of you may have seen this error before. You may see it work on your assignment. If you do, it means the number of parameters in your SQL doesn't match the number of bind param statements. So I need one more. We need to fill our publisher ID with our new publisher ID variable. And it's going to be an integer. So that's going to make this error that the number of variables and number of tokens don't match. It's going to fix that error. 4 parameters in the SQL and 4 parameters. So even if you misspell one of the names, if the names don't match, you get that same error. That there's a variable and a token mismatch. It's a common problem. We just have a typo. It'll generate that error. So I'm going to refresh and resend. It says my game is saved. And now if I look in the database, this time it actually saved a publisher ID. So not only have we added the dropdown to the form, but we're now saving the value from the dropdown to the database. I'm going to add one more game just to try this out again. Say new game 3, and I'll pick a different publisher this time. Save. So now I can choose another publisher ID. So the changes we've needed to make on our game details form and on the save page, those are complete now. So our form has this select dropdown that uses a loop from our second table, our publishers table. And our save page now includes whatever option the user picked in the drop-down list. Does anybody have any questions about integrating, how we integrated the drop-down list and the save? I'm going to upload this code to GitHub now. So you'll see I'll go to my terminal and I'm going to run the 3 commands we talked about earlier. I'm going to run git add dot to track all the changes, all the files. I'm going to make a new commit, so lesson 5, publishers, drop down on game form, right? So I'm describing what we changed in my commit message. And now I want to upload my changes to GitHub, so I will just git push origin, the master branch. So if you need any of the code, I've updated the repository on GitHub. Right? It shows my new commit message, and it shows that I changed these 2 files. We changed game details and save game. These were just changed today. All the other files are from a week ago. And all my commit messages show up here. So this is why we want to commit from the command line, so we can put these descriptive messages in. If we drag and drop, then the message just says added by upload, which doesn't tell us very much. Then next week, we'll also want to add the publisher names to this page. That's a little more complex. We're going to leave that for today. So not only can we save the publisher, but we can show the publisher name on this page. We're not going to do that right now. Are there any questions about our drop-down integration into the form? So in your assignment, this is what I'm looking for you to do. The drop-down should not be on a separate page. It should be included in your form, like we've just done. I'm going to stop my share and my recording for today. I'm going to step away for 5 minutes. If you have no questions and don't need any help with the assignment, then I will wish you a good rest of your week. And again, your assignment is due next Tuesday at 5. There's no quiz for this week. If you have questions or want some help on the assignment, then I will come back at 12:55 and I will try to help as many people as I can before 2 o'clock. If you do need help and your code is not on GitHub, then please go ahead and create your repository now and upload what you have so far so that I have a simple way to access your project. Okay, so please stick around in WebEx. I'll be back at 12:55 if you need help. And if you don't need any help, I will see you next week.